Alright, we've officially reached the point where I'm worried about the Phoenix Suns. This was supposed to be a relatively easy series. Out of all the teams remaining, the Mavericks were probably the worst one out there. I mean, they certainly weren't a bad team, but they were certainly probably the worst one out of everybody remaining. Phoenix has been a massive disappointment on both sides of the ball. Their offense technically has been okay. I mean, they do technically have the #1 offensive rating in the postseason, but it certainly doesn't feel like it. Their defensive rating has completely dropped off. They were 3rd in the NBA with 106.8, and now they're down to 9 out of 16 teams remaining with a rating of 112.9. This team cannot defend the perimeter to save their life. They're giving up so many threes to Dallas, who is hitting them at a historic rate. Phoenix is also having just an egregious amount of turnovers. In the most recent game going on at the time that I make this, Phoenix has 4 to 5 times as many turnovers as the Mavericks do. Not only can Phoenix not keep the ball, but they also can't take it away. Phoenix came into these playoffs as one of the best road teams of all time, but they have struggled big time in away games, not just in this series, but against the Pelicans too. So far, they haven't even won a single game in Dallas, and frankly, it hasn't even been that close anytime they're not playing in the Valley. So let's go over this roster to see where exactly this disappointment has been coming from. Obviously, the biggest one is the one that the haters are salivating on the most, Chris Paul. He has completely disappeared ever since having a big outing in Game 2. He had a few decent games against the Pelicans. This was honestly the reason why that series didn't go to 7. But at the moment, he looks like a shell of his former self. He's only averaging 6 assists per game while averaging more than 3 turnovers and 3 fouls per game. He's just making simple mistakes, bad decisions. He's showing absolutely no aggressiveness in shooting the ball until it is far too late in the game. He's missing passes than he usually makes. He isn't able to get the ball into the corner of other guys. He hasn't been able to get the ball into the shooting pocket to allow his guys to get off clean shots. He hasn't been attacking from mid-range. He and Ayton look like that they've never played together. We're not seeing a lot of chemistry between them. We're not seeing the lobs that we usually see between them that make this offense so deadly. I don't know if it's an injury or some type of mental block that Paul has, but he clearly has something that is disturbing him and is making him play far below than what he was for most of this season. Devin Booker has, I would say, lived up to what he did in the regular season. He shot pretty well in this series overall, and his stats have been on pace with what he was in the regular season, but it would definitely feel quiet. It certainly doesn't feel like he's scoring 26-27 points per game. Whenever he does have a bigger night, it just hasn't really seemed to affect things too much. He hasn't had a 40-point game yet in these playoffs, and I know he hasn't played every single game, but honestly, with the way Booker was last year, I really would have expected that he would have had some big time performance by now. Depending on how these playoffs were going to go, and I get that there are still potentially some games left for the Suns, but I was kind of expecting that we would be crowning Devin Booker in that top 10 conversation. But how he's been playing so far in these last 2 series has certainly shown he is anything but that. One guy that I really gotta talk about, and someone who is severely disappointed, possibly even more than Chris Paul, has been Mikal Bridges this postseason. I don't really see people getting on him as they are on other players, but he is someone who really has not shown up for the Suns. He has not done anything to slow down Luka, which, I mean, I know it is Luka Doncic, but he was also 2nd in Defensive Player of the Year voting, and it certainly hasn't felt like it. Brandon Ingram obviously went off against this Suns team too. Bridges is shooting 28% from 3 from someone who was near 40% not that long ago. That is a huge drop off and a huge loss for this Suns offense. It feels like he's been doing far too much with the ball in his hands, doing a lot more mid-range or kind of awkward floater shots. Not that he can't make those, but typically I want to see him in the corner, or I want to see him scoring on the fast break. That's what he does the best. But so far, he has not been the rising star that we have really seen for the last 2 years. And honestly, he's even been outplayed by Jay Crowder. Crowder had an absolutely awful first round. I think he went like 3 of 26 against the Pelicans. Here he was shooting near above 45% for the series, so I'll give Crowder his credit there. Even a few times he's beaten Luka Doncic off the dribble and off of a closeout, which is far more Luka's fault, but the fact that Jay Crowder is doing that definitely is worth some credit. His defense could have been better, but I really don't have too much complaint, as Crowder's been one of the few guys who's actually played better than what I would have expected. The last guy in the starting lineup is Deandre Ayton. Ayton has definitely maintained his improved play from last year and from the last year's playoffs, but he has still been showing off a lack of physicality. He's still doing post fades or post hooks fading away from the basket on guys who are much smaller than him. Not really something I would want to see when you have a 5, 6, 7 inch advantage against smaller guys. I get that you can't just bully everyone around you without running a risk of an offensive foul, but still, he just isn't really acting like he is the biggest guy on the court. He feels like he's a 6'5" guy trapped in a 7' guy's body. Speaking of getting trapped, he's certainly getting put on Luka far more than I would like. The Mavericks are doing a great job at forcing the Suns to switch, which honestly I didn't even think Phoenix would be switching as much as they would. I don't really blame Ayton here, as he is a 7-foot center and he belongs in the paint, and I think he's actually done alright in staying in front of Luka. And another thing with Ayton is he's actually playing less minutes per game now than he was in the regular season. He's only averaging 28 minutes per game when in the regular season he was playing 29. Given it is the playoffs and when you tighten up rotations, I would expect him to be in the at least low 30s per game, but only playing 28 minutes per game for a former #1 pick who's supposed to be the next part of your big three, I have no clue why Ayton is not out there more. And the last thing with Ayton is something that has affected him for a big part of this season but he goes off in the beginning of games, but as the game goes on, he gets far less touches and far less attention. I don't know how many times this year we've seen Ayton. He goes 3 of 3, 4 of 4 from the court in the first 5 minutes of the game, and he looks great, and then he barely touches the ball for the rest of the half. Ayton has seriously developed a great touch and a great mid-range game that the Suns love to show off for the first 6 minutes of the game, but after that first round of substitutions come in, we hardly see Ayton utilized in the same way that we do for the first few minutes, and that is something the Suns really lose out on. And with the guys who come in for the Suns once the starters go out, the bench at the Suns is what made them such a good team and why they were favorites for such a long time in the season, but the bench as a whole has not provided the depth that the Suns need. Honestly, I can't really say a lot of positive things about the bench. Cameron Johnson should have far more minutes than what he's getting. I think he was averaging about 22 minutes per game, but he still has been a little disappointing in what he's playing. I really would have wanted to see him more around that 25-26 minute per game mark. This year, JaVale McGee was one of my favorite backup centers. He always brought great energy and great hustle, but it certainly hasn't really felt like it. And honestly, as much as I like Bismack Biyombo, he is getting far more minutes over McGee than I really would have thought. Cameron Payne has also been an absolute zero factor. I love to call him a wild card for these Suns because he's great at going out and sometimes surprising with 15-16 points coming off the bench, but so far he's only averaging 3 points per game. He is someone that the Suns have really needed to step up, but by averaging just a 1 3-pointer per game and while not being that efficient in Chris Paul being this bad, that is definitely a recipe of disaster for these Suns. But this isn't really just all about the Suns being bad, because Luka and the Mavericks have been doing whatever they want. On the offensive side, they've been forcing far too many switches. It seems like every other possession Chris Paul is getting bullied on with Luka, and Chris obviously has been struggling on both ends of the court, and Luka against Chris Paul is an almost automatic bucket. I really wish we would have seen Phoenix done more to prevent Paul from getting onto that matchup. Phoenix still has a long team with guys like Crowder, Bridges, Booker, and Johnson. All of these guys I would say are at the very least solid, if not good or great defenders. Any one of them would be a better matchup than Chris Paul, but Paul just looks so outsized out there, and the Mavericks are doing a great job taking advantage of that. Phoenix simply cannot defend against Dallas. They are absolutely clueless when it comes to stopping these open shots, and it doesn't help that Dallas is making threes at a historic rate. If I want to be 100% honest, Luka has slightly disappointed me with how he's been playing this series. And that's because for this series to go into 7 games, I honestly would have expected that Luka would have had to average a 40-point triple-double every single game for them to get this far. But Luka has been relatively mundane. I mean, he's still been pretty amazing, but his stats are far less than the amazing ones I expected they need to win. He hasn't been super efficient, but he also hasn't needed to be super efficient because his impact goes far beyond that. It seems like every possession on the court, he is having the Suns scramble, trying to find someone to cover him. Honestly, Phoenix is lucky that Luka has had some sort of foul trouble, because this could have run away a lot quicker if they didn't run into those issues. I would say Phoenix definitely got punched in the mouth in this series, but that is what's supposed to happen in the last series against the Pelicans. And that was supposed to happen in Game 3, and Game 4, and Game 6. But Phoenix has repeatedly been punched in the mouth, and you're supposed to come back after being punched in the mouth once or twice. It's not supposed to be a consistent thing, yet it seems to be happening near every other game for this team. They clearly are not learning their lessons and still just look uninspired and far too relaxed for playoff basketball out there. It really feels like this team doesn't realize that they are the ones with the target on their back, and they're the ones with the expectations to live up to. Regardless of who ultimately wins this series, this is still a major win for the Dallas Mavericks, Mavericks for pushing Phoenix to 7 games. And don't even get me started on the Golden State Warriors. I'm certainly going to talk about whoever it is in the Western Conference Finals, and while I'm still likely to think that it's going to be Phoenix, yeah, I'm not expecting a lot of things from them. So if I'm being fully honest, I still think we're going to go into Game 7, and I still would expect that this Suns team is going to win, especially with the energy that they get on playing on their home floor, but I have absolutely no confidence going with them into the next round. They struggled against a Pelicans team that was a 9th seed at the start of the playoffs. They struggled against a Mavericks team who was by far the worst team going into the second round. And now they're going to struggle against the Warriors team who they barely beat multiple times in the regular season. I'm starting to get to the point where I'm just beyond done with this team and ready to throw myself against the wall. This was supposed to be the greatest Suns team of all time, and well, they're barely even having a chance to make the conference finals. So that's it for this one. A Heat video is going to be coming out soon, so I'll see you guys then.